Hi there. It's October the 30th, and we're continuing our journey through the book of Lamentations. In Hebrew, this is called Echa, which is from the first word. It means how in Hebrew. How is this possible? The prophet is saying. Traditionally, this is linked to the prophet Jeremiah, although the book is actually anonymous and his name doesn't appear in it. But it's written at the time of the fall of Jerusalem. And we saw yesterday that the book is divided up into 5 chapters, and there are 5 laments. And the first 4 of these are written in a particular style. They're written in what's called an acrostic style, with one verse beginning with each successive letter of the Hebrew alphabet, rather like our A, B, C, D, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, and so making quite a crafted approach. We come today to chapter 3, and chapter 3, or the third lament here in the book of Lamentations, is slightly different. Where the first 2 have had a letter of the Hebrew alphabet for each line, here there are 3 lines of each letter. So there's an A, B, 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 G, G, G in Hebrew, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, and so there are 66 verses in this particular chapter rather than the normal 22 of the first chapters. And something interesting that we mentioned yesterday that happens in the middle of this chapter is that the letters Pe and Ayin change places. Pe comes before Ayin in this, which is rather like our O and P in the order of the alphabet changing places. It's a strange thing to do, but perhaps it reflects something of the upheaval that the poet feels, or the singer feels here, that things are such an upheaval in Jerusalem and Judah because of what's happened, that even the letters of the alphabet are changed, something's happening to them. So this particular chapter, where the first 2 have been written in the female voice, this chapter is written in the male voice. It's a man speaking, and actually says, I'm the man who has been driven out by God's club. God has pursued me with his club. He's pursued me into darkness rather than into light. He's walled me in. He's chained me up. He uses some very powerful images here. He says that God has become like a bear or a lion to me. And he's directed his bow against me. He's taken his bow and directed his arrows against me, which is a very important image. In the Hebrew, the word bow, keshet, is the same word that was used back in the time of Noah when God put down his bow in the clouds. And we talk about a rainbow, but actually the word in Hebrew is a word bow. So it means like a bow and arrow. So God put his bow down and said he would not take it up against humanity again. But the man's saying here, it's as though God's taken up his bow again and he's firing it against us. And not only that, but he's given us bitter herbs and vinegar to drink. Rather like that pictures for us and presages Jesus taking the vinegar and gall on the cross. It's that horrible suffering kind of drink that is given to those who are suffering. It's all they can have to drink. It's all that's left. But then in verse 22, there's a change in the tone of the hymn, and we begin to have a kind of a reaching out, a hope, because in verse 22 it says that the Lord's covenant grace, his covenanted promises, never fail. They're new every morning. Without that, we would have perished. And it's a wonderful sense of hope. It's a very famous verse, but it's amazing that this verse of hope is here in the midst of these lamentations. It also says that it's actually good in our youth to be trained and to be yoked, he says, and that God isn't rejecting permanently his people. And in fact, in verse 32, he refers to God's actions of hesed, of God's hasadim, of his covenant graces, his commitment that comes out of the fact that he's made a covenant to his people. And so there's this reminder that although they're receiving these bad things from the Lord, there's also good that comes from him. And there's an encouragement. The lamenter, the singer here, actually says, let's turn back to the Lord. Let's turn from our rebellion. All this bad stuff has come upon us because of our rebellion. We've been turned into rubbish because we didn't listen to the Lord. He says, my eyes are like springs of water. He says, but then right at the end of this chapter, he says, I called on you, Lord, and you listen. And you said to me, Lord, don't be afraid. There's hope coming through here in the midst of this terrible suffering. And right at the end of chapter 3, there's a call for vengeance and for vindication. You know, when we go through this really hard times, when we go through the difficult times, when we even feel chained and we feel walled in, it's good to remember that this covenant love, the covenant grace of God, his commitment to his covenant never fails. It goes on forever. Good to remember that when we're in the midst of the hard places. And if you're in a hard place today, remember his covenant graces will not fail. They are unlimited. They are new every day. Have a very good October 30th.